If you are watching the news out of Washington right now, you need to slow down and separate noise from reality. The panic you are seeing is not just political theater. It reflects something deeper and far more structural, a growing strain inside one of the most stable defense partnerships in modern history. For over 70 years, the United States and Canada have operated under an unspoken understanding. The U.S. would anchor continental defense strategy, and Canada would integrate closely into that system through NORAD, NATO, and joint procurement. That structure created efficiency, interoperability, and trust. Now that trust is being tested in public. At the center of the tension is the proposed Canadian purchase of the F-35. The aircraft itself, the F-35 Lightning II, built by Lockheed Martin, is not just another fighter jet. It is a networked combat platform designed to plug directly into American command, logistics, and intelligence systems. Canada originally committed to acquiring 88 of them as part of a long modernization plan to replace its aging CF-18 fleet. On paper, it made sense. Canada and the United States share continental air defense responsibilities through NORAD. Operating the same aircraft simplifies training, maintenance, and joint missions. But procurement decisions are never just technical. They are political, economic, and strategic. Under President Donald Trump, trade tensions between Washington and Ottawa intensified. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other sectors created friction. Public rhetoric about leverage and economic pressure unsettled Canadian policymakers. When political uncertainty enters the equation, long-term military contracts suddenly look different. What once appeared to be seamless integration can start to look like dependence. Prime Minister Mark Carney approaches policy from a systems perspective shaped by his background in central banking. From that vantage point, risk concentration matters. When a country's most advanced fighter fleet depends on foreign-controlled software updates, spare parts supply chains, and classified mission data pipelines, there is an inherent vulnerability. The F-35 relies on a centralized logistics and data infrastructure managed primarily through the United States. That does not mean there is a literal kill switch waiting to be activated. There is no public evidence of such a device. However, practical leverage exists in subtler forms: maintenance scheduling, parts prioritization, software certification timelines, and upgrade sequencing. In a moment of diplomatic crisis, those mechanisms could become pressure points. That is why the alternative under discussion, the Saab JAS 39 Gripen E, built by Saab AB, carries symbolic weight beyond its performance specifications. The Gripen is marketed as a sovereign-friendly platform. Sweden has historically designed it for dispersed operations, cold weather resilience, and rapid turnaround from austere bases. It is cheaper per unit than the F-35 and requires less complex infrastructure. More importantly for Canada's political debate, Saab has previously offered extensive industrial participation and technology transfer arrangements to buyer nations. For policymakers concerned about autonomy, those promises resonate. The controversy escalated when the U.S. ambassador to Canada publicly suggested that diverging from the F-35 could complicate continental defense cooperation. Such statements land heavily in Ottawa because NORAD is not symbolic. It is operational. American and Canadian officers sit in the same command centers monitoring Arctic airspace. Radar coverage, satellite tracking, and interception protocols are deeply integrated. If procurement divergence created technical incompatibilities, adjustments would be required. That does not automatically mean NORAD collapses, but it would introduce friction into a system built on standardization. The economic dimension is equally significant. Canada's aerospace sector, anchored by companies like Bombardier, has long sought stable defense contracts to sustain high-skilled employment. Saab's proposal to assemble aircraft domestically and potentially integrate surveillance platforms, such as Global Eye variants built on Bombardier airframes, turns a military purchase into an industrial policy decision. Instead of exporting billions to an American prime contractor, Ottawa could recycle a portion of that spending into domestic factories, research labs, and supply chains. In an era of supply chain nationalism, that argument carries political weight. At the same time, there are hard constraints. The F-35 is already embedded across NATO. Countries from Europe to Asia operate it, creating a broad ecosystem of shared training, munitions compatibility, and intelligence integration. Canada participates in NATO missions, where stealth penetration capability matters. If Ottawa pivots entirely away, it must weigh interoperability costs. A mixed fleet approach, retaining a limited number of F-35s for alliance operations while acquiring Gripens for homeland defense, could be a compromise. That would preserve high-end NATO compatibility while enhancing domestic industrial benefits. There is also the Arctic factor. The Arctic is becoming strategically important as ice recedes and great power competition intensifies. Russia has expanded its northern military footprint. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state. Canada's geography makes it indispensable to North American early warning. Any perception that Washington is pressuring Ottawa too aggressively risks unintended consequences. Alliances depend on voluntary alignment, not coercion. If Canadians begin to see defense integration as a vulnerability rather than a partnership, political momentum for diversification grows. From Washington's perspective, losing a major F-35 customer is not just a financial issue. It sends a signal to other middle powers weighing their own procurement decisions. Defense exports reinforce geopolitical influence. When countries operate American systems, they align more closely with U.S. doctrine and supply chains. A visible break by America's closest neighbor would carry symbolic impact, even if practical cooperation continues. What we are witnessing, therefore, is not the shattering of a monopoly overnight. It is a stress test of alliance management under political volatility. Strong alliances absorb disagreements quietly. Fragile ones fracture publicly. The rhetoric surrounding this debate has amplified the perception of crisis. Yet institutions like NORAD have survived previous disputes, from trade wars to Iraq war disagreements. They endure because strategic geography does not change with election cycles. The deeper question is about sovereignty in an interconnected age. Absolute independence in modern defense systems is an illusion. Even domestically assembled aircraft rely on global components. But countries still calibrate how much leverage they are willing to tolerate from partners. Canada appears to be recalibrating, not abandoning, its relationship with the United States. By exploring alternatives, Ottawa increases its bargaining power. By issuing warnings, Washington seeks to preserve cohesion. Three outcomes remain plausible. Canada could proceed with a mixed fleet that balances alliance integration and industrial sovereignty. It could pivot more decisively towards Sweden if political tensions escalate, or Washington could soften its stance to secure the broader order. None of these paths automatically dismantle continental defense, but each reshapes the tone of the partnership. The real story is not about one jet versus another. It is about trust. Defense integration is built on confidence that supply chains, software access, and political leadership will remain predictable. When unpredictability enters the equation, even close allies hedge. Whether this episode becomes a permanent shift or a temporary dispute depends less on aircraft performance charts and more on diplomatic restraint in the months ahead. So the hook is not that a 70-year system has already shattered. The hook is that it is being tested in full view of the world. The decisions made now, calmly or recklessly, will determine whether North American defense remains a model of integration or becomes a cautionary tale about how quickly political turbulence can spill into strategic foundations.